what he does every day? The women are on one side of the Ganga, at a ghat, and we're at another ghat. We leave all our clothes. They leave all their clothes. When we and our wives come out of the Ganga, he exchanges. The only thing we have to put on are our skirts. And these cholis and saris. And our wives come out and there's just dhotis. And lungis. He remains in the Ganga for 6 hours minimum every day. He doesn't come out of the water. How will your son maintain his health? Jagannath Misha, he was becoming very angry. And then the young girls came to complain to Sachi Mata. They said, Sachi Devi, you know, this Nimai of yours, he harasses us so much. He steals our clothes. We're little girls. We come out of the Ganga. We have nothing to put on. Sometimes he insults us. Sometimes he splashes us. Sometimes he picks quarrels that we can never win. Other times, our parents taught us that we should worship Lord Shiva for a good husband when we grow up. And we bring offerings of sweets and fused rice and other things, and he will just come up and take our offerings and throw them in the Ganga. Other times he throws sand in our face. One said he spit water in my face. And another said, after I came out of the Ganga, he took sticky okada seeds and threw them in my hair. Another girl said, he's just a little boy, and he says, I will marry you. Several of the girls started explaining what happened to them. They were worshiping Shiva for a husband. And Nimai would come and move Shiva aside and sit on the throne. And he would start eating all the offerings. Laddus and kheers and all kinds of, he was just eating and eating and eating. And he'd take the garlands for the Lord and put them around his own neck. And he would take the sandalwood and he would put it on himself. And the girls would say, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? How can you do this? This is meant for the Lord. And Nimai would say, if you worship me, I will bless you to have a beautiful, learned husband who will take care of you, and you will have each 7 very healthy, strong, intelligent sons. And a very, very loving, kind, protective, handsome husband. Just worship me. So some of the girls were really thinking, this is good luck. They didn't know he was God, but it really sounded nice. And others, they thought, what is this boy doing? This little boy, he's taking all of our offerings. I'm not going to give it to him, and they'd run away. And Nimai would yell at them. He'd say, come back and worship me. Otherwise, I will curse you to have an old, ugly husband and 4 co-wives. So what could they do? They ran back. And they worshiped the Lord. And they're telling Sachi Devi, this is what he does every day. And if we complain to our parents about what he does, then they're all going to be complaining to you like anything. They're going to come to quarrel with you. And Sachi Devi, she would just smile and say, I'm sorry, I will somehow or other, I will keep him from going to the Ganga. They say, no, actually, don't take him, don't keep him from the Ganga. He said, that's why we go to the Ganga. Externally, we're going to worship gods and husbands and do all these other things, but actually, we just go there to meet Nimai. This was their mood. And Vrindavan Das Thakur explains that if the Vedas took 10 million forms, and each form had thousands and thousands and thousands of mouths to speak, they could not fathom the good fortune of Jagannath Mishra and Sachi Devi, who had the supreme absolute truth, Gopal Krishna, in the form of Nimai as their own loving little son. But Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami explains in Chaitanya Charitamrita, one day when Nimai was doing all these things, very, very mischievous, on the bank of Ganga, he saw a little girl. He was just a little boy at the time. He saw a little girl. She was the daughter of a great Brahmin named Vallabhacharya, and her name was Lakshmi Priya. She's the eternal consort of the Lord. She's the incarnation of Rukmini. She's the incarnation of Sita. She's an expansion of Srimati Radharani. And when little Nimai saw little Lakshmi, even though they were very restless little children, he was at least, their love immediately awoke for each other. Such deep love. And Lakshmi voluntarily offered all the garlands and all the sandalwood and all the sweets that she brought to worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead. She, as a little girl, she offered them all to Nimai. That was their first meeting on the bank of Ganga. And although they were very, very beautiful little tiny children, that love was awakened, established. Nimai was so very mischievous, and he had no fear of his mother and father. On this particular day, when all the Brahmins were complaining to Jagannath Mishra and all the girls were complaining to Sachi Devi, Jagannath Mishra picked up a stick. And he said, I will teach him a good lesson today. He cannot do these things to you. And they said, no, don't hurt him or anything, but he's there right now. He's there at the Ganga right now. So Jagannath Mishra, in his parental affection, so he went storming over to the Ganga. And meanwhile, the little girls who had just complained against him, they went running from another direction back to the Ganga, and Nimai was with all his friends, joking and laughing and swimming and splashing and doing all of his pastimes. And the little girl said, Nimai, your father's coming with a stick. Everyone just complained to him. He's coming to punish you. And Nimai started laughing. And he said to his friends, if my father comes, tell him I haven't come to the Ganga today. You're all still waiting for me. So then he jumped out and he went another direction. Meanwhile, as Jagannath Mishra was on his way to the Ganga, Nimai was gone. And Jagannath Mishra arrived. He said, "Where is Nimai? Where is Nimai?" And the little boy said, "We're still waiting for him. He hasn't come yet." I said, "What? I was just told by all these people that he was here. He's been here for so many hours." He said, no, he hasn't come yet." And the Brahmins went up to him and they embraced Jagannath Mishra and they say, "Actually, he just ran away." But please no, we love whatever he does. Be happy. You are the most fortunate man in all of Brahma's creation to have Nimai as a father. He's the source of all happiness and love for everyone. And Jagannath Mishra, he embraced them and said, "Please forgive my son for his naughtiness. And please pray for him and bless him." Meanwhile, Nimai arrived home. And Sachimata, who just heard all these complaints that Nimai was in the Ganga for so many hours doing all of these Leelas, she was astonished because he was dressed in the same clothes as he was in when he left for school that morning. You see, he would go to school, and after school he would be in the Ganga. And there was still ink spots all over his hands and his body. And there was a thin layer of dust on his body. And his hair was absolutely purely dry. How everybody's complaining against my Nimai. He hasn't been to the Ganga today. And just when she was... Jagannath Mishra arrived, and he was very angry. Not only did Nimai do all this to the Brahmins and the little girls, but he ran away and escaped. And he looked at Nimai, and Nimai just smiled, and Nimai jumped on his lap. Jagannath Mishra's heart totally melted. Nimai started embracing him, and he started embracing Nimai, and he said, "How is your body so dry, and how is your hair so dry, and how do you still have ink marks if you've been in the Ganga all day?" And Jagannath Mishra said, "Nimai, don't you even fear Vishnu? You sit on Vishnu's throne and eat Vishnu's offerings and put Vishnu's garland on yourself, and you take Shiva's offerings and you enjoy those. Aren't you even afraid of Vishnu and Shiva? And aren't you afraid of causing disturbance to great Brahmins?" And then Nimai looked at him and smiled, an angry kind of smile. He said, "My dear father, I haven't even been to the Ganga today. If they're charging me with all of these misdeeds when I haven't even been there, then now I'm going to go there and I'm going to show them what I could do." And then Nimai jumped off his father's lap and ran back to the Ganga. Sachi Devi and Jagannath Mishra looked at each other like, who is our son? Who is this Nimai? How is this possible? But their hearts were so overflooded with the ecstasy of love, all they could do was cry. And meanwhile, Nimai ran and he goes back, and all his friends were still waiting for him in the Ganga, and they all cheered that Nimai came back. And one of them said, Nimai, you escaped a good beating today." And then Nimai told him everything that happened. He explained everything, with his father, with his mother, and they were all laughing and laughing and laughing, and then he jumped back in the Ganga and continued doing all the things that we were talking about. So, it's described by Vrindavan Das Thakur that Nimai didn't have fear of his mother and father. But whenever he came before his elder brother Vishwarup, he was very humbled. He had amazing reverence toward his older brother. He was an expansion of Nityananda, Balaram. Vishwarup is a beautiful description of how he lived. He never had any type of inclinations toward material enjoyment. He was such a saintly boy. All he was concerned about was being with devotees and hearing and chanting about Krishna. He was totally self-controlled. He respected everyone. He was the very embodiment of culture and respectability and sensitivity and total detachment from anything but the loving service of the Lord, even when he was a boy. When he would see all the materialistic ways that were going on in Navadvip in those days, it broke his heart. So from early morning, he would wake up in the morning, he would bathe in the Ganga, and then he would perform his puja in the temple to Jagannath Mishra's deity, and then he would go to Advaitacharya's house in Navadvip. And there he'd be with the devotees like Srivas and Haridas, Sri Ram, Sripati, Srinidhi, with Mukunda Dat, Vasudev Dat. And they would all do kirtan, and they would do puja, archanam, to Advaita's deities. And they would talk about Krishna, study Krishna. And even though Vishwarup was just a boy, and these others were very, very many elderly, scholarly men, avatars, whenever Vishwarup would speak about Krishna, whenever he would speak from the scriptures, it was so sweet, it was so concise, and so full of love that he would mesmerize the entire audience of Vaishnavas. It was the ultimate relish of their life to hear Vishwarup speak about Krishna. And he would spend the entire day with them. And sometimes when Nimai was just a little boy, same age as when he was causing all those Lilas in the Ganga, Sachimata would tell Nimai that I have prepared prasad. It's been offered to the Lord. Please bring Vishwarup home to eat prasad. So little Nimai would run from the Yoga Pit to Advaita Bhavan. And in the presence of all the devotees, little Nimai would come, just sometimes only clothed in the four directions. And he'd pull his brother's dhoti and said, "My brother, Vishwarup, mother is calling you for prasad." And he'd smile. And all the devotees were just in the midst of a very, very, very soul-enchanting Hari Katha, talking about Krishna. But when they saw this little boy Nimai, they didn't know that he was that Krishna that they were talking about. But one thing they did know is as soon as they saw him, they didn't even have the power to blink their eyes. Could you imagine being enchanted to that extent? They just gazed upon him. He totally captured their hearts. They were so enthralled that not a single one of them, Advaita, Haridas, they couldn't even talk about Krishna. They were spellbound. They all just stood there for several moments with unblinking eyes gazing at this little boy who was just smiling and playing. And they couldn't understand what's happened. They loved this child with all their hearts, all their souls. But by the Lord's Yogamaya potency, they couldn't understand who he was. And then I would smile at them and say, "Come, brother, come. Mother's waiting, mother's waiting." And they'd both run off together back to Sachi Devi's house. And meanwhile, the Vaishnavas, they just watched as Nimai and Vishwarup ran off, speechless. And when they were out of sight, they looked at each other. Like, what was that? Who is that? Who is that child? How does he have this power over our hearts? It was inconceivable to them. Vishwarup, he was very grave, very sober. But he would watch the pastimes of his little brother, Nimai, and was struck with wonder. He would see how all the Vaishnavas would be attracted to him. And even he, by the Yogamaya potency, didn't know that he was God himself, that he was Krishna Gopal. He was thinking, my brother is so special. Vishwarup, that was the joy of his life, to watch the pastimes of his little brother. And to be with the devotees, singing about Krishna. So this way, in those days, the people of Navadvip, the ordinary people, especially the scholarly people, who were like the teachers, they were so vain, so proud of their learning, of their accomplishments, of whatever they had acquired. And for them, the Vaishnavas, they actually hated the Vaishnavas. Because the Vaishnavas were just the opposite. They were humble. To the Vaishnavas, they just wanted to serve. To these others, the goal of life is to enjoy. The Vaishnavas would respect everybody. And these people, they didn't respect anybody. They only respected what was good for them. And they were always wanting more and more. And the devotees, they didn't really care if they had anything or everything. So they would be constantly criticizing, blaspheming the devotees. They would see this chanting of God's names. They thought, this is just sentimental stuff. We are scholars of Sanskrit grammar. They would see a devotee. They would see Vishwarup. Vishwarup is Balaram. Vishwarup is the source of Mahavishnu, as is Advaita Charya. Haridas Thakur is Lord Brahma. If they want to punish you, they could do some very, very extraordinary things. But they're devotees. They're taking humble positions. And unbelievable. Vishwarup would see Haridas Thakur being blasphemed, he would see Sridhar being blasphemed, he would see Advaita being blasphemed, he would see Srivas Thakur and his brothers constantly. He would hear them saying, this Srivas, this loud chanting of the holy names, he's going to destroy Navadvip. What is this nonsense? It's now Chaturmasya, Vishnu's sleeping. And they're chanting his names. If they wake him up, he's going to get so angry, he's going to destroy the whole of Navadvip, and we're all going to be destroyed because of Srivas. What to speak of the Mughal king who has outlawed this public demonstration of Hindu rights. Because of Srivas' brothers, we're all going to be devastated. So before that, we should beat him, we should tie him up, we should tear down his house, we should throw it all in the Ganga. This is what they would talk. They would see a devotee walking, and these people of Navadvip, they would, the proud scholars, they would yell out, "Oh, Vaishnav, waste of time. You cry for Krishna, but why doesn't your cry break your poverty? What is the use?" Real success, the real blessings of God is when you ride in a magnificent palanquin, or you have a pedigree horse to ride upon, and you have at least 10 servants running ahead of you and running behind you, doing whatever you say. Whether one is a sannyasi or a yogi or a chaste and faithful wife, still you have to die just like the rest of us. So why are you wasting your time with these things? The devotees would weep and cry in compassion for these people. It was for these people that Advaitacharya was crying, "Krishna, please come and deliver them." And Vishwarup, the small boy, he was at this point just reaching his adolescence. He was a young boy. When he saw this, it was intolerable for him. He just stayed with the devotees. His heart would break, seeing the materialistic ways of the people of society. And one day he heard his father, Jagannath Mishra, talking to his mother about arranging for Vishwarup's marriage. That same night, in the middle of the night, without saying a word to anyone, Vishwarup, who could not tolerate seeing the burning fire of materialistic ways scorching the people of Navadvip like this. He couldn't see their faces, not out of hate, but out of compassion. That night, he left home forever. Without saying a word to anyone, he approached a sannyasi and took sannyas. Was given the name Shankar Aranya and traveled throughout India for the rest of his life. When Sachi Devi and Jagannath Mishra woke up the next morning and found Vishwarup was gone, they were beside themselves with grief. They loved him so very, very dearly. And not only that, after not knowing where he had gone, what happened to him, finally they get the news that this boy has become a sannyasi and he will never come home. They were plunged in an ocean of grief. Sachi Devi could not stop crying. Jagannath Mishra was beside himself in sorrow. And little Nimai, losing his elder brother, it was devastating to his heart. Little Nimai was crying. Somehow or other, all the relatives and the friends of Jagannath Mishra and Sachi Devi came up to the house to try to pacify them. And they were saying to Jagannath Mishra, even though they were feeling the same separation as he was, they were trying to help him. They said, actually, you are so fortunate. Your son has become a sannyasi. That means, according to scripture, they were quoting, 60 million of your forefathers and foremothers will all be liberated when a son in the family becomes a sannyasi. So you should be proud. We are all proud. We should be happy. He has liberated your whole family for so many generations. He's found Krishna. And Jagannath Mishra, that didn't satisfy him much. And they would hold his hands and try to pacify him. And sometimes Jagannath Mishra would start philosophically understanding, and other times he would think of Vishwarup's beautiful face, and all those philosophical understandings would disappear. And he was thinking like this, that actually nothing is mine. This body is not mine. This home is not mine. Nothing's mine. Actually, Krishna gave me this body, and Krishna gave me Vishwarup to be my son, and Krishna has taken Vishwarup away, so whatever Krishna desires is perfect. And with this type of philosophical reasoning, he became pacified. But what pacified him the most was Nimai. Everyone would say to Jagannath Mishra, you may have lost one son, but look at the son you have. He's the crest jewel of all sons. He's so beautiful. He's so intelligent. He's so everything. And Nimai would say to his mother and father, he said, Vishwarup may have left, but I will stay with you. I will stay with you and serve you, and I will become a householder, and I will take care of you. You always have me. One day, there's a ceremony where this happened little before. The ceremony where a child begins his education. It's one of the samskaras, where Jagannath Rishi got a slate and some chalk and taught Nimai the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet. And little Nimai learned everything so fast. And everything he learned, he would always be writing down the names of Krishna, Mukunda, Murari, Hari. So brilliant. And after Vishwarup left, Nimai became totally engrossed in studies. He had two teachers, Vishnu and Sudarshan. And anything he learned, anything he was taught, he immediately learned and assimilated. He was totally immersed in his books and his studies. And one day, Jagannath Mishra said to Sachi Devi, I'm very worried about our son, Nimai. She said, why? He's doing so nicely. He said, he studies so much. And he's studying the Vedas. If he studies the Vedas, then he's going to learn that this material world is illusory and everything is temporary and only the absolute is permanent. And he's going to renounce the world just like Vishwarup did. Vishwarup was engrossed in studying the Vedas with the Vaishnavas, and he took sannyas. If we allow our little son Nimai to learn about the Vedas, he's going to become a sannyasi. And Sachimata said, what are you talking about? He said, he promised to stay home. He's our playful child. He loves to study. He said, from this day on, I'm going to forbid him from any study. And Sachi Devi said, how do you expect him to earn a living? And how do you expect him to... Haribo. Wonderful to see you. How do you expect him to get a good wife? Who's going to marry their daughter to an illiterate person? And Jagannath Mishra, he said, although you are the daughter of a great learned Brahmin, you are speaking like a foolish child, my wife. said, it's only by Krishna's grace that one gets wealth. It's only by Krishna's grace that one gets a good wife. It's not by studying. Look at me, I'm a learned scholar, and we don't even have any rice in our house. And look over there. There are people who cannot even write a single letter of the alphabet, but they have so much wealth that there are dozens and dozens and dozens of learned pundits just sitting in their courtyard waiting to get a donation from them. It is not by learning that one gets good wife and good... It is only by Krishna's grace. And then he called Mumbai and said, Mumbai, from this day, I forbid you to study any books. Mumbai did not like this. Jagannath-Misha said, you could do anything you want, but not study. So that was a good... that was a good opportunity. So Nimai started doing anything he wanted. He couldn't study. He would play with his friends doing so much mischief, not only all day, but sometimes all night. He was just a boy. And Jagannath-Misha didn't try to stop him because he was afraid if he tried to stop him, he would start studying again. And it describes some of the things Nimai would do. Of course, he did unlimited mischief. But some that we read about in the scripture is he would get his friends. And 3 friends, Nimai and 2 others, they would put a blanket over their body, a big blanket, so they looked like a bull, like a huge bull, right? And what they would do is during the day, they would go around and look to see nice banana plantation. And then at night, they would put the bull costume on, and the 3 of them would charge into the banana plantation and start knocking over all the banana trees. And the owner of the house, he would come out, he would hear all these banana trees getting knocked down. He would come out and see this big white bull. And he would start screaming, hi, get out from here, out from here. And the bull would run away, and then they'd take off their costume and laugh and laugh and laugh, and then put on the costume and go to the next banana plantation. Sometimes. Because in those days there were no toilets in the house. You would go outside if you wanted to respond to nature's call. So Nimai and his friends would go to their houses and tie or bolt the doors and windows closed from the outside. And then when the people in the house had to go to the bathroom, they'd pull the door. And you can't knock when you're inside. Nobody outside. They were locked in the house. And they're Brahmins, so they can't just start responding to nature on the floor. No cooking pots or anything. What are they going to do? Nature's calling. And we all have experience of the evolution of that experience. First nature's calling, then she's crying, then she's screaming, then she's howling. They were in total desperation. They're knocking on the doors, they're crying, open the door, open the door, open the door, open the door. And meanwhile, their bladders and their bowels are bursting. And Mumbai and his friends are outside listening to all this, and they're laughing and laughing and jumping and clapping, and then they run away. The scripture doesn't go beyond that one. One day, some of the ladies, they came to Sachimata, some of the boys too. They said, Sachimata, your son, Nimai, he's sitting in a very, very dirty place on top of pots that have been used. Because in those days, like in Puri, you cook with clay pots. And when you cook up with either cow dung or fire, the clay pots become completely black with the soot from the fire and the smoke on the back. And then after you cook with that pot, you discard the pot. It's considered contaminated at that point. After it's been cooked and offered, then you always cook in a new pot. So there was a pile, like a small hill, of all of these old, used, black boat clay pots. And Sachi Devi came out and saw little Nimai sitting on top of this pile of pots. And because of all the blackness, there was black spots all over his body. It is explained his body was like a golden lotus, and the black spots were like black bees that were swarming around the lotus, the golden lotus of his beautiful form. So Sachi was in great dismay. She cried out, Nimai, Nimai, why are you doing this? You're in a dirty, contaminated place. You are the son of a Brahmin. Haven't we taught you? What will people say that you're sitting on the top of rejected pots? Come down and take your bath. And Nimai said, how am I supposed to know what is clean and what is dirty, what is right and what is wrong, when I'm not allowed to study? You cannot blame me for sitting in dirty places and not knowing the difference between right and wrong, because I'm just an uneducated person. And Sachimata said, please come down. Don't you know you have to bathe now? You are contaminated. And Nimai said, but I'm uneducated. How do I know these things? And then he entered into the mood of Dattatreya and said, everything is one. There is no difference between dirty and not dirty, because when I touch anything, it becomes completely purified. Wherever I am present, the Ganga is there to purify everything. And besides, my mother, these pots were used to cook for Vishnu. They were offered to Vishnu, therefore they're sacred. They cannot be contaminated.